Hello, I'm Angus Jenkinson. I'm the Secretary of the Cybernetics Society, and I'm introducing Professor Tom Scholte. Tom is a wonderful, lively, engaging person, as you will see. He's the Vice President-elect of the American Society for Cybernetics, and he's also a Professor of Acting and Directing for both stage and screen at the University of British Columbia, as well as having produced and directed for such venues as Toronto, Berlin, and the Sundance Film Festivals. Today he'll be talking about perceptual control theory and enabling us to explore the nature of drama in relationship to cybernetics. Please, Tom, take over.
And eventually we'll do something interactive together. So this won't be all just me, blah, blah, blah. But I do want to share some of the background thinking about this. So yes, a deeply cybernetic question, and my coming to understand this as a cybernetic question, because as much as we laugh about it, it is the central question for actors who are trained in the Stanislavski system. And I won't keep referring to that. I don't mean in any way to suggest that there is only one way to approach acting, that there aren't other methods. But this is the one in which I was trained. This is the one with which I'm most familiar. This is the one that, of the different ones I've sampled, is the one that to me produces the kinds of results that I'm looking for as an actor and as a director, but is not, of course, the only approach. But this approach is deeply, deeply cybernetic. And the question of what is my motivation actually is, we do teach our students that that is the most important question you can ask at any moment when you're working on a character, working on a scene. Okay, so I want to go back to a paper that's often thought of as the birth of cybernetics by Rosenbluth, Wiener, and Bigelow, where they're talking about some shortcomings they see in experimental physiology. And they're saying it's been largely incapable of explaining the mechanism of voluntary activity. We submit that this failure is due to the fact that when an experimenter stimulates the motor regions of the cerebral cortex, he does not duplicate a voluntary reaction. He trips efferent output pathways, but does not trip a purpose, as is done voluntarily. So they're stimulating motor regions to get the animal to do something, but there's no purpose behind it. And it doesn't seem like a satisfactory, it's not recreating the behavior they're interested in studying. Strangely enough, this is also a description of, in the Stanislavskian sense, bad acting. It's the fact that it's an external attempt to show actions rather than to approach the generation of action and behavior from a place of purpose, and from a place of purpose that then is in response to its environment and into a feedback loop. So Stanislavski, you'll see some resonances in this description, and we start to get quickly into the cybernetics of what Stanislavski's talking about. He tells his students, a human being wants something, fights for something, wins something every moment of his life. Theater consists in staging major human tasks and the genuine, productive, and purposeful actions necessary to fulfill them. As to the results, meaning, the performance, they take care of themselves if everything that has been done beforehand is right. And beforehand is figuring out what the character's motivation is. What do they want? The mistake, now the next part is what really reflects back to the first quote. The mistake most actors make is that they think not about the action, but about the result. They bypass the action and go straight for the result. And what you get then is ham playing the result, forcing stock and trade. So ham-fisted acting where the person seems to be up there trying to demonstrate an emotional state. And we just call it overacting, right? We call it, it's not believable, it's overacting, is the result of someone thinking there's a type of behavior that I need to try and produce. So I'll go out there and try and force that behavior into being, rather than thinking about what does my character want? And as we go into the language of control theory, what is my character trying to control? And letting the behavior be the naturally occurring result of a process which, under imaginary circumstances, an agent is trying to control some kind of variable in the environment and is receiving feedback of either a positive or negative type of feedback that is going to then alter their behavior. So sometimes this thing is called an objective, a motivation. in a really important book for actors called A Practical Handbook for the Actor. And it's a very, very thin book. And it's a book I was given in my first year of training of actor. I went to UBC as well as being a professor here now. And this, whatever, 85 pages was the beginning of a massive revolution in my life that's led to me being here at this moment. And they call it a physical action. And there's some criteria here. And I think you'll see that it becomes more and more cybernetic in its implications as we go along. They say it has to be something physically capable of being done. So for instance, to pursue the American dream is not a playable action. You can't get on stage and show me yourself pursuing the American dream. But you can start filling out a job application, which might be a step on the path to pursuing the American dream, or preparing for an exam, or and all of that. So it has to be something that you can actually do. It has to be specific. Here's a particular language they use. It has to have its test in the other person, meaning that whether or not you're achieving what you're doing can only be seen in the response that you're getting from the other person. So, and this is connected to the next one. So not the next one, presuppose any physical or emotional state, but this idea of a cap. And the cap for the authors of this book is the specific thing that the other person could do or say to let you know that you had achieved your objective. So saying, I want her to love me, or I want him to love me is not a sufficient motivation. I want her to say the words, I love you, to me, has a cap. There's something specific. So that's what translates it from a general idea to a specific perceptual variable that can be controlled for. I want to hear those exact words, or I want her to hug me and give me a kiss, or I want her to, hold my hand. Those are actual perceptual things that you either know whether they're happening or whether they're not happening. And therefore you can be in a closed loop to try and control for those things and your spontaneous behavior. So this whole idea of the method, or the Stanislavski system, suddenly taking acting to a place that seemed much more natural and much more like the behavior we see in everyday life, and not stagey theatrical behavior, has to do with the fact that Stanislavski's system is entirely a cybernetic perspective on behavior, and a way to get actors to recreate those, to not make the mistake that's pointed to by Rosenbluth et al. In terms of trying to go for the result rather than for the intention that then generates the behavior. So in acting, we call it given circumstances. We look at all this analysis. Who am I? Who am I talking to? What are the people we talk about? Where am I? This is all the questions an actor needs to ask themselves, not how am I going to say the lines? When am I going to shout, and when am I going to be quiet? When am I going to stand up? When am I going to sit down? Those are not important when you're preparing. These are the questions that are important, what we call the given circumstances. Then we get into what I would say is the epistemology of the person, or the ontoepistemology is a term I like. Not everyone's crazy about that word, but I think the two sort of determine each other. What is my point of view? How is the game of life played? How does one win? What does winning mean? What are the penalties for breaking the rules? A very simple example is, I'm a trusting person. I believe that most people can be trusted, and so I go into the world in a trusting way, versus no, I believe most people are out for themselves, and so I enter a room in a different way, and I'm assessing the situation differently as an agent. And that what the actor needs to do is to commit to or internalize the character's point of view rather than show it to the audience. The character's belief system will influence the actions taken, and that is what the audience wants to see. So rather than showing them a nervous person, the classic example is from a book by Robert Cohen, which I'll get to in a moment, who says an acting student came to him and said, I need to play a person who everyone says is paranoid. This character's paranoid. I don't know what to do. Should I do this? Should I talk fast? Should I do X, Y, or Z? And he said, I got another idea for you. Why don't you just imagine that everyone is around you is a threat, and then see what happens? And that changed completely the person's performance. It was not about generating the external behavior it was about entering the ontoepistemology of that person, and then being in response to the other agents in the environment. And then they have needs and obstacles. What stands between me and what I want? What's the other character saying or doing that prevents me from reaching my goal? And these are the obstacles that then generate feedback that then either we adjust what we're doing or we try a different tactic to get what we want, or and so that's how the person needs to adjust in their and the different behavior that's generated by trying to control a variable that stays consistent. And then the stakes: what will I lose if I fail, gain if I succeed? What will happen to the people I care about if I fail or succeed? What must I face tomorrow if I can't get what I want here and now? So what makes it absolutely essential to control that variable in the way the character is trying to? And often a director will use this question if the actor seems to be not have enough energy, or it doesn't seem important enough, or it's not. I'm saying, what's at stake for you here? If you cannot get that controlled variable, the perceived variable, to line up with the internal reference value for where you want that variable, what will happen to you and the people you care about? So this is the quote that opened this whole floodgates for me from this book called Acting Power. And he talks about that in performance, the actor must not only know their objective, which I was quite good at. Being a fairly cerebral sort, when I was in acting school, I got pretty good at being able to determine an objective for my character, knowing all those criteria. It has the test and the other person, etc. But then Cohen says the other thing, though, is that when you're in performance, you must constantly be open to the feedback and allow your performance to fluctuate and change based on the feedback. So he uses the classic example, we've all heard it a zillion times, the thermostat, right? It's calibrated to go on when feedback reveals the room temperature is too low, go off when feedback reveals it's the opposite. Cybernetic system, therefore, is a self-correcting system rather than a continuously correct one. For the actor, the feedback includes from the scene partner, you're trying to control some variable involves the other person. Not only conscious dialogue and conscious nonverbal signals like winks and shrugs, but also the unconscious and autonomic responses of our physiology, behaviors of which we as humans are skilled observers and interpreters, or at least we like to think we are. Often it's our misinterpretation of those things that's the issue. They are all part of the feedback of information, which makes us adjust our behavior toward the satisfaction of our intentions, or sometimes to adjust our intentions as well. This constant sensing for feedback was the missing ingredient from my own acting. My acting was clear. It made sense. I had clear objectives, but I actually wasn't alive inside the moments. I wasn't actually responding to the slightest variations or flickers in the difference of a tone of voice or a look in the eye. I realized I actually didn't know how to listen when I was acting. I knew how to speak and then wait for the other person to speak and then start speaking again. And I was not in a continuous feedback loop. And so often the difference between acting that's working and not working is the degree to which the actor can actually remain in the feedback loop and not fall into a kind of linear process of taking turns. There has to be this continuous circular flow between the actors. So perceptual control theory, Angus has already mentioned it. It is a legacy of cybernetics. Whether it's part of cybernetics proper or not, people debate about this. For me, it's become incredibly important to my cybernetics. And it maps even more precisely onto the Stanislavski system of acting than even some other cybernetic sources that I've used. But here's an example. So I'm about to show you Stanislavski in action as I think a cybernetic engineer working with actors. They're about to do a scene from a play, and this actor has no lines in the next scene. And Stanislavski comes up to that actor before they're about to run through the scene and says, "You know, this scene is all about you, right? You're the most important character in this scene." And the actor's like, what do you mean? I have no lines. I don't understand. It's like, no, this scene is about you. All right, let's try it. The character is supposed to be making sure that another character doesn't get on a train. That's the simplest way. It's a very complex plot, but it's to stall the other character from getting on the train. And okay, let's try it. Go. Stanislav says, stop. Says to the actor, "You're standing in the wrong rhythm." And the actor says, "Standing? How can you stand in rhythm? What do you mean standing in the wrong rhythm?" So Stanislavski gives him this advice. Watch Tarkanov carefully, observe his actions. So observe the other character. He's forgotten about the train. His mind is on refreshment. For you, that's good. You can relax for a moment and look at what the train is doing. You can even run out onto the platform for a moment, come back quickly and concentrate on Tarkanov. Try to guess his intentions and read his thoughts. He's remembered the train and is rummaging in his pocket so he can pay for the vodka. Get yourself ready to keep him in the buffet at any cost. Your readiness to complete an action will force you into a different rhythm from the one you are in now. So try it. And they continued to improvise this non-verbally for an hour, just all the different ways his rhythm and his posture and his whole state of being would change just by the fact that he's not an actor standing there who knows he has no lines. He's a person trying to make sure that that other character doesn't get on a train. So every time that other character moves, he's adjusting in some way. And then we talk about beats in acting, the beat change. So a beat is a single unit of action, and a beat change is the point where a new action begins. A beat change occurs when a new piece of information is introduced or an event takes place over which the character has no control, interesting word, and which by its very nature must change what he is doing. So some variable, some difference that makes a difference, to use Bateson, takes place that then makes the character / actor have to change what they're doing. So these are individual, those are the units of action that we work with. And then the hierarchy through which the actor does their work, rather than starting with the words, how am I going to say those words? They actually start by looking at the given circumstances using, I don't know if I have a slide about this, but I usually like to talk about Bateson's definition of what he calls cybernetic explanation. Why, of all the possible paths that this could have taken, did it take this path and not the other paths that it could have taken? He calls it, it's essentially a negative form of explanation. And it has to do with the given circumstances, because inside the given circumstances are all of the constraints that lead the play to take the plot that it takes, if it's a well-written play and not full of lots of horrible gaps in its plot and in its setting. Then the actor figures out, what is my motivation? And then finally they go to the words. Only then. This is a thing called active analysis, which is a later method of Stanislavski's, where the actors would improvise the scene using their own words, then go back to the scene and read it. How closely did what we do map onto what I'm reading in the scene? What do we need to change? Put the scripts down again. So rather than memorizing the lines ahead of time and then trying to perform them, they would learn them by doing, by improvising. And so then the actor's entire focus can be just on the feedback loops between each other and not trying to remember the words. And then eventually they found that they would learn the words, that the lines seemed to learn themselves because they were getting attached to behaviors that were being generated in this purely Stanislavskian cybernetic way. So the result of this process is a journey from the actor's improvised speech through the director's sideline promptings to an ultimate state of knowing the lines because they were the words the actors needed. They didn't have to learn them in a formalized manner. By working this way, Stanislavski believed the actual speaking of a text could become the creation of the living word, with its roots running deep into the actor's soul and emerging as an expression of his or her true interaction. Oh, that's just the Toad unit. You probably all know that. So we don't need to talk. So this takes me to where this work has led me, which is forum theater. So many of you are probably already familiar with the work of Augusto Boal and the theater of the oppressed. So the theater of the oppressed began, Boal in the late 60s, early 70s in Brazil, living under a brutal dictatorship. They started off doing agitprop plays, agitation and propaganda. So they would take plays about political issues, about oppressive situations, and go into villages of peasant farmers and do these plays about the need for a revolution. Until one time they were in a particular village and a farmer came up to Boal after the show and said, loved your play, loved that song you sang where you said, we will shed our blood for our freedom. That's great. We noticed you had some guns in the play and we really heard that message, we'll shed our blood for freedom. We know where the landowners live. Let's take your guns and let's go take care of business. This made Boal very nervous. He said, no, I don't think you understand. Those weren't real guns. Those are pretend guns. And the farmer thought for a moment and then he said, oh, okay, now I get it. All right, well, the good news is we know where there are some real guns. So we won't use your guns. We heard your message. We'll shed our blood for our freedom. Let's go. Let's get our guns. We'll go find the landowners. Boal gets increasingly nervous and says, no, you're still not quite getting it. This is a play. We're just actors. This was pretend. And this farmer thought for a long moment. And then he looked at Boal and said, oh, okay, now I get it. when you sing, "We will shed our blood," it's our blood you're talking about, not yours. And at that moment, Bilal realized, I'm doing this all wrong. I'm coming in here from outside these communities and daring to stand on this platform and tell these people who are living this reality of risk and oppression how they ought to do things. This is all wrong. So that led to the creation of forum theater, in which a play is created with community members. The show, and here's the description, about the situation of oppression. We show the audience the play all the way through once. The play builds to a crisis and stops, offering no solutions. The play is then performed a second time, where audience members can then stop the action and enter the stage themselves by replacing characters with whom they identify and try to solve problems or issues inside the story. The rest of the cast stays in character and improvises. The theater becomes a creative laboratory where we try ways to transform ourselves, our communities, and the world. So here's an example of a play that Bilal made with people in Sweden in the 70s. First action, Eva is in her office at work. The scene shows friends, the boss, day-to-day problems, the process of finding new projects to work on, the daily grind of a hard life. Second action, Eva is at home. Her husband is out of work. Their daughters are spendthrifts. They need money. A female friend drops around and they go out. They go straight to a demonstration against the construction of atomic power stations. Third action, back at the office, the boss comes in whooping with joy. A new project has been accepted. Everyone celebrates the news. Champagne is consumed, joy unbounded, till the boss explains what the new project is about: the development of a refrigeration system for a nuclear power station. Eva is torn. She needs work. She wants to support her fellow workers, but the situation poses a moral problem for her. She gives all the reasons she can for not accepting this new project, and her colleagues give their opposing reasons. Finally, Eva gives in and accepts the job. So that's the play. It plays all the way through, and then it's done a second time. Audience members. So this practice has evolved a lot. So with Bilal, you could only replace the character that was oppressed. You can see in this play that oppression takes a much subtler form than it might living under a military dictatorship. The work changed when he went to Europe and saw different, more subtle forms of oppression. My mentor is a gentleman named David Diamond here in Vancouver, who changed the name of what he does from Theater of the Oppressed to something he calls Theater for Living, as he felt the oppressor-oppressed binary was not as useful for the kinds of social interactions that he was working with people on. So the method I learned from Diamond is you can replace any character. You can replace the person we think is the oppressor. If there's something about that character that you feel you understand the dilemma they're in, you feel you understand what's going on in their worldview, but you think you know a different way that they can enter the action and try a different approach to change the outcome of the situation, you raise your hand and you say, stop. You come up on stage, you replace that character, and the actors improvise with you. And then the facilitator, who's known as the Joker, will let the improvisation go on for a while. Eventually, they'll stop the improvisation, and then there's some questioning. So my research has really been about bringing the tools of systemics, cybernetics, and systems theories of various kinds to this work. So David Diamond evolved Theater for Living from Theater of the Oppressed, and I'm continuing to develop something I call systems theater from the Theater for Living, as I've learned it from David Diamond. So we will use causal loop diagrams when we're making plays. We'll use causal loop diagrams when we're unpacking plays with an audience. We'll use the language of perceptual control theory to talk about the characters and to talk about the different motivations that they have, and to talk about the different constraints, to talk about internal conflict and external conflict. We will use the classic systems iceberg metaphor when building a play. You've probably all seen the iceberg. I should have it here, but the iceberg has the iceberg sticks out of the water, and it says the events are the things that we can see. Well, a play is obviously about events. That's what it shows us. If you go a little deeper into the iceberg, those events are embedded in patterns of events that we see over and over again. We keep having the same arguments about this or another conflict about this. Or, you know, in the instance of our society's most pressing issues, another police shooting of an unarmed Black person, for instance. There's the event of the single shooting. There's the patterns of ongoing shootings and other events. Those patterns are then nested further down the iceberg, as most of you probably already know this, in this theory at least, not that this is the truth, but a theory, a way of thinking about it, is that those are nested inside structures. What are the policy structures? What are the dynamics? What is the structure of the system that generates these patterns, out of which comes this event? And then at the bottom level of the iceberg, where there is, according to this thinking, the most leverage for shifting the system, that the deeper you go down the iceberg, the more leverage there is for creating a shift, are mental models. What are the ideas about the world, the way our descriptions of the way the world is, our ideas about the way the world should be, that either created that structure or continue to hold that structure in place? And so when we're making plays, what you see on the stage are the events, but what needs to be underneath the events are all these things that can be excavated through the interactions of the intervening audience members, so that we discover the patterns. Maybe we unearth the structure, and then we're able to talk somewhat about the structure. And then finally, are we able to talk about the mental models that have developed the system and keep the system in place? So I do this work through, as Angus mentioned, a program called Conflict Theater at UBC, which was an initiative of human resources at the university where I work. A few people there had done training with David Diamond, and they felt they had taken the work as far as they could, and they felt they needed a theater professional to come in and help them go to the next level. And I had the great privilege and honor of being in the right place at the right time to be asked to be that person. And it's become the central work of my life. And so, but one of the really important things for me when I agreed to do it was that, because they kept using the word resilience a lot. And I've grown increasingly suspicious of resilience narratives, because they seem to continue to place the emphasis on the person who's being oppressed in the first place. So if this was going to be a program out of HR, I did not want to replicate a program that just keeps telling people in conflict in our organization, you better find more ways to be more resilient, rather than trying to ask ourselves, why do we keep needing to ask people to be more resilient? We can try and teach homeless people to be more resilient, or we can try and do something about the housing crisis. And so I think it became really important for me that this not be just a training employee resilience, but that it also be a mechanism through which people can safely, as much as possible. There is still always hierarchy in the rooms where I work, right? There's still always managers and the people who report to them in our sessions. So how truly free they feel to express themselves through their interventions or through their subsequent discussions is always constrained to some degree by hierarchy, but as much as possible to make it a mechanism through which we can also try and examine the mental models that undergird the structures of the university, and can we bring them out into the light and discuss them, and maybe try and apply some leverage, if there are certain conflicts that just keep rising. Another thing that we've done really significantly that's become really important is I would say that the plays we started doing when we first got this going were of a more managerial nature. And the play I brought with me is of a more managerial nature. So you'll see one of our older kinds of plays, but I thought it might be the most useful for this particular group in this particular discussion, or I could try and pull out another play if I can find it right now. But we have increasingly begun to partner with our Office of Equity and Inclusion. And so our plays have been able to go from more managerial kinds of conflicts about structures and processes and bureaucracy to actually begin to confront systemic racism in the university, sexual harassment and misconduct, and the scope and the depth of the plays that we're making has really grown over the last few years. Not surprisingly, as the group of people making these plays has become more diverse. There was not a single person of color in our first summer intensive. And by our third summer intensive, we had Indigenous people from various backgrounds. And subsequently, our plays, because we never start the process by going, okay, we need a play about X. The community that comes to the summer intensive, most of whom have not met each other until we've gathered, they're going to generate the plays. I have no control over what the plays are going to be about. My job is just to help them shape the plays and get them ready to be taken into forum. And subsequently, the more diverse the groups that have been coming together to make these plays, the deeper our work has gone into issues like systemic racism, inequality, and prejudice and discrimination. So that's the sort of background on the work thus far. And again, we continue to use cyber systemic methods while we develop the plays, and increasingly while we unpack the plays. It's been tricky because I want to develop my systems theater within the confines of conflict theory. And there have been times where I haven't pushed as hard on the cyber systemics as I might want to, because it was not created as a cybernetic. It's me bringing that agenda to it. And people have been going along with it. The amount of leverage and buy-in in terms of systems and cybernetic terminology and ideas has been remarkable for me. Like when I was trying to get academics to get on the cybernetics train, wasn't working. Now I work with staff at the university, and when I use cybernetic metaphors and analogies, it's clear as day to them that what makes sense about it. So I'm actually finding that a way to introduce a greater presence for cybernetics in my institution is actually through these amazing groups of staff, rather than siloed and entrenched academics who are not interested or think it's some outdated notion. But fortunately, I've gotten a grant to do what will be my first pure systems theater project, where I won't, the sort of shackles will be off in terms of how much I just lean into systems and cybernetics. I'm going to be working with a group called the Asante Center in Surrey, BC. Surrey is a suburb of Vancouver, and they work with people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And we're going to be looking at the overrepresentation of people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder in the justice system, and negative outcomes for people with FASD in the justice system, using this approach, building plays with stakeholders. We're going to involve retired police officers. We're going to involve retired judges who are going to come and play in the theater with us and model the systems that continue to generate these negative outcomes. And see, the plays provide both a place to rehearse new types of intervention, but also hopefully to gain new insights into the systems that we're modeling. So I'm going to stop there for a moment and just see if there's any questions before I sort of bust out a play that we can look at and maybe read a little bit of, and maybe take a crack at seeing what someone's intervention into the play might be. But I'll stop sharing for there and just open it up for questions or comments. Janos.
Right. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. You described very vividly as to how you use, in the course of your work, all these vast number of ideas and concepts that you've thrown up. Could you give us a concrete example as to how and what is actually happening?
Yeah.
You use all this. Please.
Okay, so
might that be best by actually doing it in a while, and then that would.
Yeah, we can, but I would love to answer. There's a couple of moments that I've written about that I think would be useful to talk about how we use this particular idea. So, for instance, perceptual control theory. This would just be one example. Part of the theory is that internal conflict is generated when a person has two different control systems trying to control the same variable, and they have relative amounts of gain, right? One might be stronger than another. So, if I'm dieting, Richard Markin uses this example. If I'm dieting, I have a strong urge to eat that piece of cake, and I have a desire to lose weight and be healthy. My choosing not to eat the piece of cake will take place because the control system around wanting to be healthier has higher gain than the one that wants the piece of cake, for instance. We did an improvisation once where where someone tried to have a conversation with this person about their conflict, and it just went nowhere. The conversation just stalled. She was stumbling to find what to do. One of the what are they called, animation techniques from form theater is you freeze them in the spot in the moment, and then they ask questions. And one of the questions you ask them as their character is, what is your secret thought? And by secret thought, we mean something that is true for you as this character, but that you would not say out loud in front of the other character under any circumstances. Under any circumstances would you say this out loud, but it's true for you. And the actress was someone who intervened from the audience, said her character's secret thought was, I want you to tell me everything. Okay, that's an interesting secret thought. Then when we got into further discussion, I said, what, you seem to be at a loss to know what to ask her next. And she said, well, I wanted to keep the conversation positive. I wanted to make sure the conversation stayed positive. So then we were able to talk about the incompatibility of those two control systems. You've got one saying, tell me everything, and then you want to keep the conversation positive. How do you possibly make those two things happen at the same time? I want you to be able to say whatever is on your mind, but I have to control. So we're able to talk about that internal conflict for that person, because part of what we're doing with the program really is to try and raise people's capacity to navigate conflict. We are not in the business of conflict resolution. We're in the business of conflict navigation. And so raising people's capacity and to reframe conflict from something to be avoided or won into an opportunity for learning and growth. And so having the language of perceptual control theory to talk about around her inner struggle around, I need the truth and nothing but the truth, but please keep it positive. That was one example where we got to use one of, you say, of the many different types of systems ideas that we try and build into the work. I hope that's helpful, Janusz.
You lost me after the first 120 sentences that you pronounced. Could you model this in some tangible?
We will do it. We'll do a section of the play. We'll do a section of a play in a moment.
Oh, well, that's amazing.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Jude. Oh, I think you're still muted. I still can't hear you.
I said, am I in control? Yeah. I'm in control. Good. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Now, my question is, you did this pyramid thing, and I would like to know what you called it, where you had the event.
Yeah, it's just called a systems iceberg, and it floats around in various different systems. I think I got it in the journal, The Systems Thinker.
Okay, now, the next question is that very low level you talked about after structurals, where you look at the actual lineage of what's going on.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking is that has to do with hegemonic concepts.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And often ones that now remain invisible because things just become the way we do things. They become
like objectivity.
Exactly. So what's the mental?
Aggression is our fundamental emotion.
Right. Yes.
Or that peace is something to be achieved.
Right. Yeah. And at the university, we can talk about, ideas about meritocracy or, that a lot, and then we can debate them. And I love to bring in another thing, a tool that folks might be familiar with, which is Werner Ulrich's critical systems heuristics. Once a mental model has been unearthed, then there's all kinds of great boundary judgment methods from the systems community that we can apply to them. And so we've got other tools to continue to explore.
Okay,
cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, Pile, and then Robert.
It strikes me that a lot of what you're saying about theater pertains to everyday conversations. The same pyramid applies, the same kinds of importance of the motive versus the action applies. And so could this be taken as a way of considering our daily lives as well as theater?
I believe so. To me, that's why the Stanislavski system, quote unquote, works, because Stanislavski's whole goal was, how do I get people to stop behaving like actors on a stage? And how do I get them to behave the way they appear to behave in real life? My conclusion that on his way to develop a method of acting, what he developed was a theory of human behavior, and that theory of human behavior is fundamentally cybernetic. Yeah, Robert.
So what I'm aware of as you're talking is that there's a very much of a performative aspect of what you're doing as you're talking about performing. And I'm aware of in my own life, just as there are people that I can interact with in a performative way that is really fun. Like the last time this was happened was one of my neighbors who's a retired policeman from Alaska, and we were actually working on repairing a dock. And we were basically telling each other stories, and while we're also consulting with each other about what went next, and he's telling me what I'm asking him, tell me what to do next, and all this sort of thing. So can you talk a little bit about, this is really relates to what Pile was talking about the performative aspect of everyday life. And I found that, I mean, I'm not thinking about myself and as a performer, but I'm very much aware that, hey, I'm not afraid to do I'm not afraid to do this. And I'm aware that I do it with people who are open to this. Can you talk a little bit about how this fits into this cybernetic way of looking at performance?
Yeah, and I think this is where the work of Erving Goffman comes in for me really interestingly, and I go back to the Goffman's idea of the presentation of self in everyday life. And if you go back and reread that, I mean, he's just talking about performance in exactly that way, that in different contexts and who the different players are. And then I think you could apply the lens of PCT to that and say, well, different variables, controlled variables change depending on who I'm talking to, right? I mean, if I'm talking to a friend of mine who we went to university together, as opposed to talking to my mom, there's different variables I might be controlling that are different, right? I want my mom to still think I'm a good boy. so I might change the type of language that I use, or I might change, how deeply or not I get into certain topics. So yeah, I think it absolutely fits. And part of what I've been trying to do is get more and more social science academics that I know to let me come into their classrooms, because I feel like they could see a living model of a lot of these different things. And one of those is in sociology around the performative aspect. And performance studies as a field too ended up being about much more than just theater. I mean, performance studies talks about how does a waiter or a waitress, a table service at a restaurant as a performance, all of those things.
Tom,
Angus,
just a little heads up that we have 35 minutes left.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
great. Cool. I'm sure there's tons of stuff in the chat that I haven't been able to see, but yeah, you're all having good chat with each other, which is great. Okay. Yeah, the Goffman stuff where he talks about onstage and backstage too, right? The difference between the way that people deal with the customers and the way they are with each other in the lunchroom, right? The radical difference between the way people use language and the ways they behave when they're considered on stage or off stage.
Recommend?
I would recommend Goffman's, it's called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And then there's also his frame analysis as related topics as well that are really important, but performance of self in everyday life. I also, while we're recommending books, those of you who are scientists in a real sort of bench practicing way, there may be scientists of that type in this crowd. Not a cybernetics book, but one that speaks to this stuff really, really in a clear way. I'll just put it in the chat here. This has to do, to me, it has to do with eigenform, which is a whole other thing we won't get into right now. But there's a book called The Play of Nature. Oh God, who's it by? By Robert P. Crease, who's a philosopher. And he talks about experimental science being like a theatrical performance, in that it's a bunch of ways of doing things that then produce phenomenal results that are emergent. It's a fascinating study of science, and it's something I've been trying to work into something I was writing, but I haven't done yet. But that's another book I would recommend on this. Okay, so now I have to try and attach. Okay, I can do this. I'm going to try and attach a play. Okay. as I said, this is one of our more managerial plays, for better and for worse. But as Larry Richards pointed out when we did this play at ASC 2019, when someone was kind of declaring it to be trivial, Larry did remind us that, you know, what can appear trivial to the rest of us when someone's fighting for their vacation is not a trivial thing for that individual, given their own lived circumstances and the importance of the relationships involved. So it might not be a play about systemic racism, but it doesn't mean that the what's at stake for each of those people, and us not knowing what's at stake for someone when they're fighting for their vacation time, is maybe something to think about.
So you can get it if you don't know already. You can go into the chat. There's the 3 little dots on the side next to it, the script. And if you click on it, you can open the file.
And I'll open mine now too, I think. Yes. So this play has had various titles over the years. It's called Vacation Requests and Orientation Planning. So this is a very old play of ours. I want to just pick it up from a certain part, page 3. So I need volunteers. We need someone to play the unit manager, someone to play the new staff person, someone to play an administrator, and someone to play a program manager.
Yeah, I'll volunteer, Tom. Just tell
okay,
me.
Eve, you'll be unit manager.
Tom, I'll volunteer. Seymour.
Okay, great. So Seymour, you're new staff. We need an administrator. Jonathan, okay. And we need program manager. John, wonderful. Okay, so we'll just pick it up on page 3.
Okay, are you gonna screen share, or we should just do it on our own?
Just read it on your, just read it off your own, on your own copy, if that's all right.
Yeah,
we'll pick it up. They've just had a very awkward interaction about vacation times. And now they're going to get down to the main agenda item.
Tom, I don't know if it's useful to let people know, whether you can say they don't, but you can pin more than one person to stay on screen all of the time. If you put your cursor on a face, like the people who are acting, then at the top right, there's 3 little dots, and you can say pin that person. So that way that they stay on the screen for you, the different people that you want.
We can also turn off people's cameras too, but I didn't want to get into that. Can be confusing for folks, but okay. So we'll just pick it up from administrator, unit manager, everybody happy? Sorry, unit manager, everybody happy? Sure, what's the next item? And we'll just read it from there to the end.
I'm sorry, I forgot which person I was.
Oh, okay.
Is that, who just asked me that? Was that John?
Yeah.
John, you are administrator.
Okay.
I'll read stage directions.
I think my pages are slightly different. Is it top of page 3, Tom?
Yeah, it's about a quarter of the way down page 3.
Okay.
Everybody happy? Sure. What's the next item?
Okay, yeah.
Sure, what's the next item?
Wait, you didn't wait for my line.
Okay, yeah, we'll start with everybody happy.
Okay, sorry.
Everybody,
all right.
Everybody happy?
Am I administrator, Tom, or am I a different role?
Yes, you are administrator, but
Okay,
first, Eve's going to say everybody happy.
Okay.
All right.
And action.
Everybody happy?
Sure. What's the next item?
Eve, I think you have the next line.
Oh, right. You'd know if you had the agenda in front of you. Next item, orientation. We are going to brainstorm around what our unit wants to do for faculty and staff orientation.
Administrator raises their hand.
Yes?
We did this at the last meeting. You weren't there, but we did it. We spent at least 2 hours brainstorming, and we had a whole flip chart full of ideas.
We did.
Program manager goes back to working on her laptop and remains distracted.
Oh, that's not me.
Perfect. Perhaps you could update me on that.
So administrator would say new staff's name.
Oh, I didn't realize. I thought about, sorry. New staff?
So at the brainstorming, we came up with some ideas for orientation, which I have handy right here, although at one point we did start to spin our wheels. Most of the ideas are related to the resource booths that we were going to have.
Not with faculty session, no.
Oh, so I guess I'm confused about how I'm working with you for the faculty orientation.
You're not working with me for the faculty session.
Actually, it is my expectation that you should be. We've talked as a team about the faculty and staff becoming a joint session. Since you already spent 2 hours brainstorming and still have not covered this, perhaps you could take a couple of minutes to inform your new colleague here in terms of what happens in faculty and orientations.
Yes, of course. At our orientation, staff and faculty do a joint session in the morning, and then we break into 2 groups for the afternoon. Then the faculty breaks into 2 groups, one focused on research, the other on teaching and learning. We have always done it this way. You and the other staff, you look after the other staff, I look after faculty.
How am I involved with the faculty then?
You're not involved in the faculty sessions. You do staff orientation.
Can I say something?
If it's relevant.
It is. Can I be honest? I really resent the fact we're spending so much time on this when it's new staff's responsibility to be updated on what we're doing. Sorry.
Program manager glances up from her laptop.
I have to agree.
Well, people, let's step back for a moment and think about how we can better incorporate our new staff person to our team. I think that the program manager, do I have your attention right now? You seem a little preoccupied.
I'm actually trying to get urgent stuff done because this doesn't really apply to me.
Actually, it does apply to you. As a team, what we are trying to do is to come up with strategies on how we can invigorate staff and faculty orientations, as well as include our new staff person and his ideas.
Hey, you've been talking a lot, unit manager, about us as a team. Quite frankly, my understanding of team is we participate in all operational aspects of the unit. For example, the selection of a new team member, administrator, and I were not included in new staff's recruitment, nor were we consulted before you hired him. You made the decision entirely on your own, and now I'm suddenly expected to train him? No disrespect to new staff. I'm sure he's a nice person, but I don't have the time to train somebody right now before the orientation, especially when they're not getting it.
I think that this conversation has crossed a boundary.
Boundaries were crossed long before this conversation, unit manager. I'm sorry, I have to excuse myself.
Program manager exits, lights down. So that is a play that's been used a lot. Like I said, it's managerial. It's not taking on some of the deepest issues we deal with at the university, but it is, interpersonal dynamics that do take a big emotional toll on people. And when we do present this play for groups of new managers, so Conflict Theater does a lot of events in different units, but we're also embedded in a couple of training programs. So for new academic leaders, there's something called ALDP, Academic Leadership Development Program. And then there's something called Managing at UBC for new staff managers. And this play used to get done every year at Managing at UBC for a group of 20 to 30 new unit managers. And then it was their job now to intervene in this play and try and find ways through the conflicts by replacing a character of their choice and trying a different approach to moving through the conflict. So the way we frame the play for the audience, the invitation for the audience is really important, so they know what they're looking for. So the way we always frame this play, and the standard sort of framing for Conflict Theater at UBC, is to ask the audience to identify blockages to authentic and productive communication in a situation of workplace conflict. And so we use those 2 words very advisedly. Authentic, you can be authentic, but not necessarily very productive, right? You can tell someone exactly where to go. You can tell them how stupid you think their idea is, and that might feel very authentic. Isn't necessarily going to be productive. You can be productive by mincing words, by skating around the issue, or by remaining silent and not be particularly authentic. So we raise those 2 words, particularly in our invitation, to see can people find that sort of sweet spot of being able to I would say, in the words of Larry Richards, whose work has really influenced me a lot as I've continued to develop this work, reconfigure the dynamics of the situation that's going on, and reconfigure the dynamics to create new and more positive opportunities for interaction. So I would start by sort of asking the audience, what obstacles to authentic and productive communication did any of you see in this chunk of this play that we just read? We know people are behaving badly, but the more we can start to make some distinctions about particular things that might be obstacles.
Well, the split between faculty and staff.
Faculty and staff split. So there's one who that, we go right down the iceberg. You're taking us right down the iceberg immediately, Eve. The event is this argument, but way down below is, and how are you seeing the faculty and staff split manifest in there, Eve?
Like we've always done it this way. The thing about, well, what we do is we have a joint session in the morning, and then we split into faculty and staff, and then also it comes up. I mean, that's like the history that they talk about, but then also when the new person says, well, I thought I was working with you, and then somebody said, no, you're not. You're just working with staff. You do staff orientation. You don't work with faculty.
Right. So that split between them. Yeah. Malcolm.
I just felt they were talking past each other. They weren't actually, it's a classic case of not listening. And I suppose, again, just thinking of an analogy of the jazz band, whereas a jazz band will actually play off each other. This is just a cacophony of instruments.
Okay. And what do you think is motivating those? So here comes the question. What are their motivations? So when we would get this group together to work on this play, we get a group of, and the actors are always just UBC, people who work at UBC, not professional. The plays are created by the community and performed by members of the community. So we have a community of practice, and whenever we have a gig, we just send out a notice to our community of practice, hey, we're going to be doing play X. We need these characters. And so we have a roster of people that work with us. And we always start each rehearsal by saying, what's your motivation? What is the outcome that each of these people is trying to control? So I know we just had one quick run through, but if you could discern motivations from these characters, what do you think they might be? Louise?
I think for the program manager, it might be that they are comfortable with how things have been working, and they have a certain status being associated with this, with the faculty training, and so they want to maintain that position.
Okay, so there's an investment in status, yeah? There's an investment in keeping things the same because of a level of comfort and a level of status. So, and you can easily start to see that in perceptual control theory terms, in terms of, what are the variables? I need to keep this thermostat setting right here, which is I do this, you do that, yeah? James?
I mean, you could analyze the whole thing from a transactional analysis perspective. You've got a lot of parental-child position swinging, if you like, where people are telling other people what to do, and they're then sparking off. And so if you use transactional analysis, you'd end up with this kind of scenario. They're not excuse me, they're not taking it onto the adult level. So the way to address this would be to introduce some kind of adult orientation into the TA, if one was to use that.
Okay, great. I may call upon you in a moment, James, if that's all right.
Okay.
Be careful. Yeah, John.
Yeah, I have the idea that there's this requisite variety is there, but it's all pointed in the wrong direction, So unit manager wasn't at the last meeting when they already did this. Program managers multitasking on a laptop. So the attention is there, but it's pointing in the wrong way. Do you know what I mean? The attention has requisite variety. So instead of the group connecting in a kind of way that would make them productive, they're connecting to things that they weren't doing, or the things that they aren't doing that they shouldn't be doing. I find that quite interesting.
Yeah.
So I'd look at it sort of the other way around, that everybody's doing the things that they really want to do. And they don't necessarily want to be there, or they don't necessarily want to be part of what's going on, but they do have things that they want to be doing, and that's what they're doing. And when they're being asked to do something other than that, they find various forms of declining. Like which is one of the reasons computer or whatever.
Which is one of the reasons why we do this play at it's embedded in programs around leadership. And when we do the play in the Managing at UBC scenario, the only character they're allowed to replace is the unit manager. They're not allowed to replace any of the other people. They have to replace the unit manager and find some way. So interesting to think, Angus and John, your two comments about which ways of the variety being dispersed, and how is the manager going to be able to, just in the microcosm of this meeting, I mean, ultimately, who knows, maybe they want to take several steps back and do the VSM for a few months, but in this meeting, somehow that variety needs to be managed in some way, potentially. That's one particular potential approach. Yeah, Claire.
Yeah, I think about, I don't know if you know the work of Daniel Wall, and he talks about the living questions and getting at the intention, you know, asking the question at the beginning that helps to sort of bring people into that sort of alignment with the intention. It sort of seems like it's kind of like the vision of what drives people, and sometimes it just feels, I know when I look at organizations, people skip over that part, but actually it sets the whole tone for where, the whole direction of where you're going.
So just, and we may try some, I mean, I don't want to put too much pressure on you folks because you haven't rehearsed the play, because the people that are playing the characters, once an intervention happens, they need to be able to improvise. So they have to have a deep sense of their character. So it might be a bit of a bigger ask to ask each of you to now improvise as those characters. But I want to identify, because particularly going back to Janosch's question earlier about specific examples. So just to think about the observation so far, how those get converted into interventions in the play. So one is, you know, one of the first things we always see happen is someone replaces the unit manager and says, so-and-so, would you mind closing your laptop? Right? Just that beginning intervention of changing the dynamics, right? And sometimes that's the only idea they have. And after the laptop gets closed and the meeting continues to unravel, then they just look at me helplessly and go, that was all I had, was close the laptop. You know, so James, I won't make you do it at this moment, but if you were, so I love this. And this is why in the Systems Theater program, and this is why if you're interested in this work, please do reach out to me, because what I want, the full version of Systems Theater that I'm imagining is that we do these plays, you know, as the plays are done now, it's really, you know, this work awakens the variety in the room, right? There's so much variety in the room. And to me, it's all an exercise in awakening and mobilizing the variety of the audience. So the more the audience, I'm interested in performing these for audiences of systems thinkers and cyberneticians who are going, their particular interventions are going to be informed by different things, right? So for instance, so James, you bring up transactional analysis. You've got some background in that. So there's some variety sitting out there in that audience that I had no idea about. So James, if you were to, and we don't necessarily have to go through it right now, but if you were to pick one of those characters to replace and try and find a way, informed by your background in transactional analysis, to try and find a way to shift the dynamic, what would you, who would you replace and what would you try and do?
Well, first also the unit manager, because the conflict seems to come up in this section of the play at that point. Through the, you'd know if you had the agenda in front of you comment, which is hardly a disarming comment,
right?
And not responding to the fact that they're obviously frustrated that the administrator doesn't have the agenda in front of them, or at least is claiming not to. So one would look at something where you didn't say that, and you said, oh, well, you know, I'm really interested in getting some of your ideas on what we're going to do about orientation.
So there's something about those particular utterances, the one about the agenda, that from a TA perspective, that's where you're seeing the parent-child sort of dyad getting established?
Well, that particular comment is a reprimand.
Right.
because they're saying you don't have the agenda in front of you, you're not prepared. It's a really parental comment, and they're telling them off for not having that in front of them.
Yeah.
So whilst they don't respond in a negative, they don't respond to the agenda comment, that would immediately incite someone to go, well, you know, I'm going to now have a go at you. Thanks very much for saying that.
So trying to sort of comb out any of that parental, and any of moving into that parental posture would guide a kind of intervention you might make, right?
Yes.
And then in systems theater, then we have an opportunity to talk about that afterwards and to extrapolate, and for you to actually explicate something about transactional analysis to the gathered audience, you know, so they would not just see what you did and how it worked, but understand some of the theoretical underpinnings about why it worked. And then that becomes then their variety is being expanded, right? Expanding the variety of the audience members. Yeah, Jude, you wanted to comment, and then Seymour. Sorry, your mic again, Jude.
I'm having a little difficulty with the parental idea, that no parentling, because I think there's a form of parentling, like mothering, that might be conducive to the situation. Like as the manager, I might say, listen, you know, I'm sorry, we got off to a bad start. You know, I've done a lot of reflecting lately about the way I'm dealing with decision-making and interaction. And I think we need to really spend some time focusing on how we talk and deal with each other.
Yeah, nice. Great, thank you. Yeah. Seymour.
I was just going to say, please don't forget the new staff here who's trying to figure out what is this job I just got myself invited to.
Yeah, right.
And who's starting off as a child and say, hold on, I really need to figure out a way to move myself up the hierarchy, and every wire I touch, I get a shock.
Yeah.
I'm having severe issues.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, you sound like you've understood what's going. So what do you think so how would you describe that character's motivation then throughout the scene? And I think you're really onto something, Seymour, and that the impacts on that particular character are sometimes invisible, because one of the great things is someone makes an intervention. The intervention might change some things to the positive, but then we also see unintended consequences, right? We go around and ask all the characters how they were impacted by that intervention. And for some, it's gotten better, but for someone else, it's gotten worse, right?
Yeah, but that's why you have to stay in the present, in the process, living in love and performing with that intention. Otherwise, you're fucked.
Did you say living in love?
Yeah, I did.
Perfect. So if I lived in love, what I would recognize is the holes that each one of these individuals are sitting in around the table. And I would have said, I don't think I've met any of you. And I would have taken 60 seconds and introduced myself and apologized on behalf of my manager, boss, whatever, and tried to minimize some of the thorny issues that are sitting on everyone's cuffs right now. And avoid being swatted. Like that's just to change and that would have changed the state a bit, because I would have brought on the table the fundamental issue that I was brought in without proper vetting.
Yes.
Yeah, let's pretend we're all adults living in love.
Yeah, let's at least pretend. Yeah, and maybe that'll get us somewhere. Yeah, I saw another hand up. Was it Jonathan?
Mike had his
Jonathan and then Malcolm. Sorry, Jonathan, Malcolm, and then Eve. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Well, I defer to Mike, but anyway.
Okay.
It just feels like, from a negotiating point of view, that the characters most of them are happy with a win-lose situation. So rather than this is what's important to me, but it's important that we all feel like we've got an equal stake in the win. It feels like they all feel like they want to win, and everybody else feel like they've lost.
Yeah. Malcolm.
In terms of when you're saying about making an intervention, and if you could be any character, like the comments so far seem to be resolving this conflict, but do you ever actually encourage people to bring their own experience into it? What caught my eye, I know you said start a third of the way down, but you see the very top of page 3, it says, but I booked my flight. Now, if you look at the photograph behind me, that's Nepal. I've been 7 times. I used to book it 6 months in advance. And when I saw the flight, the first thing I did was book it. I wasn't waiting around to get approval.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, when I saw that line, I immediately identified with it. So by bringing my own personal experience into this, I almost feel as if I'm putting the cat amongst the pigeons, because I'm actually introducing more conflict by more or less saying I'm disrespecting the official rules. But if you really need me to go through approval 6 months in advance, something is clearly wrong here.
I would welcome, absolutely welcome and relish that intervention. And that is the point. I mean, and when we do sort of set it up for the audience saying, you know, you can't get up here and do something wrong. It really is appealing to the variety steeped in the lived experience. And, you know, so we have a mission statement and value statements to Conflict Theater. And one of our value statements is a deep respect for the lived experience of all individuals. And so if what you need to do is bring that to the fore. So the only thing that can guide you coming into this situation is your own lived experience. What have you come to believe about the dynamics of human interaction that you then want to come in and enact? So if you wanted to come and make that intervention because you have actual living experience, that would be absolutely welcome. Yeah.
And I did notice the way the script then continued. It was never resolved, because at some point the unit manager says everybody happy, and the administrator says, sure, what's next?
Yeah, the leader punts it down the road. It's a horrible lapse in leadership. It's incredible.
And that's why I was saying earlier, they're talking past each other, because at this point in time, the administrator doesn't know if their holiday's okayed or not.
No, the administrator says, you work it out between yourselves. And the other person is the new employee. You work it out and I'll get involved if I have to. Yeah. Eve.
Tom, well, Mike Lieber had his hand up a while back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mike?
Is Mike not on my screen? Sorry.
You said that the only person you can replace is the unit manager.
When we do it, sometimes. Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Is it possible to find a unit manager who did not assume, if not say, this is the way we've always done it?
Well, someone can replace the unit manager. So you have to say yes to the given circumstances that are given, but you can be the unit manager who, as a couple of people have presented, like Jude saying, well, I got off on the wrong foot. Or you can come in and be the unit manager who says, you know, when I hear myself say, this is the way we've always done it, that's not good enough for me anymore. Let me change that. You know, so you absolutely, you have to start where the character started from, but you can lead them to that transformation. And then we get to have really interesting conversations, because often what we'll also do is, if you do something radically different from the original character, then I'll bring back the original character and ask that person, you just saw what Michael did. For your version of the same character, how easy or difficult would it be for you to do the same thing that Michael did? And then they'll say, yes, I could have done, or actually I couldn't have because I'm too proud, or no, that would be too much work for me. And neither of them are right or wrong, right? But we get to talk about, and then I sometimes ask, what would have to happen to you, or what would you need to be able to do it the way Michael did? Well, I would need to trust my coworkers more, or I'd need to feel that I wasn't being judged, or so, and then it's all grist for the mill, right? It all becomes just part of the conversation. Michael,
and none of it.
Sorry, Michael, finish it. Yeah.
None of it's structural.
But
right?
Michael O'Connell has had his hand up for a long time, Tom.
Yeah. Michael's next. Yeah.
Maybe you can't see the maybe you can't see all the people on the screen at once. But we haven't spoken much about the program manager, and there seems to be a tension between the desire and need to communicate and the amount of work that needs to be done, or tasks. There seems to be a tension between some people want to communicate, others don't. The program manager seems to want to get the thing over with because there's jobs to be done. So I'm quite interested in this book by Hutchins, Cognition in the Wild, where he argues the case and suggests that maybe there are times when less communication is better, and that the right kind of forum is important. But it seems like the program manager is stuck in a situation where they're potentially stressed and overworked, but if they found a way of communicating, it would lead to a situation where they could probably share out and resolve some of these problems in a more dynamic kind of way, instead of being so rigid.
Right. Thank you, Michael. And sorry for missing you for so long. Just to talk, Michael Lieber, you were talking about structural. Sometimes what someone will eventually say is, By the time this meeting starts, it's too late. I can't change it. It's something structurally is, and that's fine. We then get to talk about, you know, so when I ask them, what would be necessary for you to be able to do this differently? They might say, well, this whole structure would need to be different. And then we get to have a conversation about what that structure might look like. So that's when we do, as I said, to try not to just always lean into resilience narratives and say, what's the deep structure here that's problematic. Sometimes we invite the audience members to create new scenes that aren't even in the play, where they could address some of those things. So Angus, yeah, we're looking at time.
So personally, I'm really convinced this is a really interesting tool for exploring and learning cybernetics and solving real world problems. But I also, unfortunately, note that we have 5 minutes left of our formal time. So I don't know if you have in mind something that you want to bring to round off, but I'm personally incredibly curious about how we see this. I mean, there are all sorts of people who can be pulled in, conflict resolution people, drama people, this person, that person, and the other. But how do we see the cybernetics and the perceptual control theory here playing out? How does it teach us in order to be able to act into situations in more effective ways for ourselves and for others?
I would say that one of the goals that I'm articulating for this work is that from a cybernetics perspective, I'm trying to create a program to facilitate people's opportunity to increase their own capacity for second order observation, their own capacity for reflexivity, their own capacity, because what we take, and there's a paper, a co-authored paper that I could put a link to, where we begin to gather some empirical evidence about what people are getting from this work. And what they're getting is they're understanding they're holding on to their own ontologies and epistemologies too tightly. That's one of the main learning impacts that we're seeing. And to me, that's, if nothing else, if this work leads people to just say, I need to let go of the certainty with which I'm distinguishing my world, then that's a huge part of it. So for me, out of the reflection, we may solve the real world problem, or we may tame it. But if what comes out of it is a capacity, an increased capacity for second order observation or reflection, then to me, that's the purpose it serves as, a particularly cybernetic tool.
It's great. So when you started off talking about, or earlier on, you were talking about theater of the oppression, and for me, I guess other people have similar experiences. There have been various light bulb moments where something has come and it's changed my whole orientation in the world. And one of them is in cybernetics and perceptual control theory, the notion that every single person is all of the time always acting towards the outcome that they want to bring about in that situation at that time, based on whatever motive they have.
Mm-hmm.
So they're always acting, and they're always acting to cancel whatever is interference. So in this situation, everybody's conflicting with everybody else because the different objectives that people have to stay the same, to change, and so on, run into conflict with each other. So everybody's acting according to that. And the moment you recognize that as a leader, then you say, well, every program of change that seeks to impose a change on people who don't want it is an oppression onto people. So somebody says, but I've always booked my holiday at that time. And someone else says, but we always meet in that way. And so people want to stick with their situation. And they're only doing what what they would do. And the moment you come along and you try and enforce a change, that's an oppression. I mean, it may be very ordinary, mundane, and everybody may go shrug, and it may not be worth the hassle. But that's the problem.
Like wearing masks?
Yeah. So at this point, you may not want to leave, but you may have to leave. And it's now it is now 7:30, which is our formal ending. So in order to enable everybody who needs to leave and wants to leave at this point to be able to leave without dodging the thing and so on, I'd like to give the opportunity for everybody to thank Tom. Tom may not leave immediately, and some people may not leave immediately, but I'd like to give everybody a chance to thank Tom and leave if you need to.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic session, Tom.
Thank you, Angus, so much
Thanks,
for this
Tom.
opportunity, and to all of you for choosing to spend your time this way. I deeply appreciate it. I fall in love with these communities more deeply every day. So thank you.
Tom and I are chatting for a little bit. Anybody who's still here can join in, and anything might happen.
Angus, can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
How important is it that it's considered to be an oppression?
Well, it depends on who you're asking. Do you mean do I care about whether the world has oppression, or do you mean in a situation does it matter?
Well, I mean the tag itself, because it can be called all sorts of things. You can call it,
sure. I'm talking that you can substitute all kinds of words, but what I'm saying is that whenever we design change, a routine principle of change is to say, well, I'm the leader, I'm trying to bring about this change, but people resist change. So what we have to do is get them to accept the change in some way or another. And there are lots of devices used in management, like you don't get paid, or you don't get this, you don't get that if you don't do something. Or you don't get promoted, or we frown at you, or something. And what I'm saying is that the most effective interventions are the ones that produce no opposition, no friction.
Well,
so change that produces a friction or objection is a change that is counter to what people want. And that's avoidable.
There's a flip side to that, because there's two forms of, I mean, you've talked about sort of top-down enforced change, and there's all sorts of obviously other ways of getting people to agree, or otherwise to an approach, or coming up with a collective approach. But there's also the type of power that you don't know is being inflicted upon you, because you're not even aware of it, and someone's controlling you, but you're not aware you're being oppressed, because you need an epiphany to realize that it's happening in the first place. So the word oppression seems to carry with it a huge amount of baggage. Because if you say I'm being oppressed, I'm being oppressed by...
I don't use the word oppression as a routine. I brought it up because of the context that this grew out of theatre of oppression, that's all.
Yeah, I'm just interested in how, I mean, maybe Tom, but how important is the word oppression in the process? And
well, I'm with David Diamond in that we've left it behind, because in the situations that I'm working in, I leave it to others to decide whether or not they want to define what they're going through as an oppression. But for me, the word is not an important part of the lexicon for doing the work that we do.
I'm only saying that if you want to be effective, then try to design things that don't produce opposition. That's all.
Yes.
Right, but sometimes that's impossible. And I think, part of the challenge of the work is, hopefully finding emergent solutions that, that were something that maybe nobody thought of before, that can lead to, courses of action that, maybe more people can agree with, but that go beyond, whatever oppositions were stated at the outset. And I mean, for me, yeah.
I think one interesting thing relates to this. Only this morning, I attended another one of these sessions, actually about ritual. And one of the things that I talked about channeling Victor Turner was many rituals can be coercive, but some can be transformative.
Yep.
And I think it's this idea that I've given up using the word oppression because it doesn't sound relevant to my existence or anyone I know. But it still doesn't alter the fact that I can sometimes feel heavily coerced.
One of the
to me, I mean, as somebody who's been involved in this, one of the most important things was to realize that we're all the oppressed and the oppressor, that we've all been both.
One of the guiding thoughts, so the closer our work has gotten, the conflict theater work has gotten to the Office of Equity and Inclusion. So we had a really wonderful director of conflict engagement named Aftab Irfan, who has just left UBC, unfortunately, for another job. But what she used to say, and what I've taken very seriously, and part of how I see the mission of conflict theater at UBC is, she said that the road to equity and inclusion is paved with conflict. We can't get where we're trying to go without conflict. There is no conflict-free way to get from here to there. So what we need is to raise our capacity to engage in conflict in productive, nonviolent ways, rather than find ways to avoid it. It's inevitable to get from an unjust society to a more just society. That road is paved with conflict. You can't step around it. So that the capacity to go through it, to have a conversation, to have difficult conversations becomes what's necessary.
You can make the argument that conflict is desirable.
Yes.
Otherwise, you don't have conversation.
I think that there isn't there like the idea maybe of an enabling constraint. And again, obviously, Tom, you're into the Stanislavski thing, but that whole idea of the method, which you said was the American version, always struck me as really thinking about constraints, about the constraints of real life. And I suppose one question, which you might want to go into this after hours, you said it in your article of 2015, is whether you think Brecht and his anti-realism is useful or not. I personally think it's not, because I just think it's so abstract and artificial. But there's no, the thing about Stanislavski and realism and the construction of realism or naturalism is an enabling constraint.
I think so too. And naturalism for me, one of the things that the implications of Stanislavski being so deeply cybernetic is that I think that naturalist theater does a great job of kind of replicating social autopoiesis. You kind of watch it actually unfold, but it needs some of the paratheatrical things that Brecht wanted, because Brecht's concern, of course, was that we would see these things depicted and they would be so natural and believable that we would then assume they were inevitable and that they couldn't be changed. Oh, that's just human nature. We can't change it. That was Brecht's big concern, was that Stanislavski's work was too successful because it just went, oh, well, that's nothing to be done about that. That's just the way it is. So while I don't embrace Brecht's aesthetics, I embrace his desire to almost annotate the performance. And to me, what form theater does is allow an opportunity to annotate the performance through the interventions. And to me, the greatest compliment I ever got for a piece of work that I directed, which wasn't a form theater piece, it was just a conventional naturalistic play. Someone said to me, I loved it. It was utterly believable, and at the same time, it had a kind of, and this is the phrase that keeps me warm at night. At the same time as it was utterly believable, it seemed to have a kind of diagnostic clarity. And to me, that's when the theater becomes absolutely, theater or film becomes absolutely sublime for me as a viewer, is when it feels just like the texture of real life, and yet I can see the mechanisms. I can see the social structures. I can see them. So I use Brecht in these strange ways in rehearsal, which we won't get into now. But I believe in Brecht's ideas and his project, but not in his means necessarily.
It's almost like a critical realism.
Yeah.
But going back to conflict, one of the things I remember, like probably 20 years ago, hearing there was a president of UBC by the name of Tuke, I think.
Stephen Tuke, yeah.
Yeah. And his comment was that the university was falling way behind because it couldn't deal with conflict, and it just didn't want to rock the boat. And I kept finding myself in situations where you go through, in an organization, you go through this whole exploring, looking at all the stuff. And when it came to the conflict stuff, everyone would sort of, stay away from it. Mm-hmm. And I think that having a mechanism to put that conflict on the table so that you go to that sublime place of, oh my God, we're actually dealing with what is in front of us, and everyone in the room recognizes it. And it's incredibly powerful, as you said, and I think the theater does that.
So may I ask you all, in terms of your experience of the world today, if a business thought that it could make customers buy from it, force them to buy, you have to do this, you have to buy this, they'd probably fail. And when they are able to do that in a limited way through, for example, monopolistic situations or things like that, then there's a major pushback from government and society and so on against it whenever it gets discovered. So essentially, if you're in marketing, business, selling, organization, you know that you've got to get people to want to buy from you in order to come. If you want people to attend a football match, you've got to get them to want to attend the football match, and so on. But when you go inside an organization, there's been a belief system that you don't have to get people to want to do it. It's enough. You can get them in enough. You need them to want enough, but you can then make them do things because you have certain powers to make them do something. That's an assumption. And in a way, that's creating a strange kind of alternative world in which you go in and there's a whole different set of rules that do not apply to the rest of the world. That's each organization, and all organizations seem to have agreed that that sort of thing is allowed. And therefore you have this power to make people do things. And if they don't, they're not behaving properly. Is that still the case today, would you say? And if so, how do you interpret that in the light of this conversation?
I think just on one thing there, it's this idea of want, because I talk about this a lot. I'm lucky enough to have just gone into semi-retirement. I work 1 day a week, but the way I've lived my life in retrospect is I don't have kids. I've never had a mortgage. I've never had debt. And so in a sense, my motivations have always been different from some people. So the motivations are still there. I still think people accept that kind of coercion in work because they want the money, they want the livelihood. And so it's almost like, if you like, a second order motivation, if we can call it that. Yeah.
I would agree. I think what everyone wants is to get paid. And ultimately, so I sometimes say this jokingly to my students, but only half jokingly. If they're really struggling to figure out what their motivation is, I say, well, at the very least, you've got homeostasis, right? You need to maintain homeostasis somehow. So how is what's happening in this scene impinging at however many orders away from it upon your capacity to maintain your homeostasis? Not getting paid is one, right?
Yeah. I mean,
because of the dominoes, you know.
Have anyone here come across, especially Tom, the work of Kenneth Burke? Because
yes.
I mean, there's a book there which relates, I think, Angus, to what you were saying. There's a book that influenced me a lot called The Rhetoric of Motives. So that in itself is actually quite suggestive. There is a rhetoric, i.e. of what motivates you. But also in terms of, I think, relevant to what we're talking about here, he developed a whole sociology called the pentad, which is, or dramatism, where he talks about doing a kind of a sociological or organizational analysis in terms of theatrical terminology.
Yeah. I think he's someone that cyberneticians could and should pay more attention to, is Kenneth Burke, for sure.
I agree.
I was luckily introduced him by a student of mine, a grad student I was supervising. I saw John's hand up, John Hicks, and then James. Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to be facilitating here, but I just.
That's cool. No, but I want to come back to what Angus and you were saying about, and also Malcolm. You know, you began your piece by talking about this fundamental thing of acting, and that an actor needs to really feel, needs to get to the motivation, and just like hamming out the action is going to be bad work. Yeah. And I think the same thing is true in organizations. Yes, you can force people by pay, or, you know, sticks and carrots, or whatever you call it. But the work of the organization, the quality of an organization, will be reflected in where the motivation comes from. So getting people on side, like, okay, look, sorry, I know we've been making horsewhips for the last 100 years, but we need to change what we're making now. You know, we need to change everything. I'd like you guys to still work with me, but we need to make a new product. Maybe think about something to do with cars. This kind of a similar thing to what you described with the Stanislav idea. You know, you sort of almost like an inception. You need to you need to create the want. You really do. Yeah, and this is a big thing in, like, you know, the Alexander technique, where the people talk about, you know, don't concentrate on the result, concentrate on the directions. It's a sort of, I think it's a tenet of cybernetics, really, in that same sense. You know, what's being looked at is beyond the superficial in a way. Anyway, I just wanted to make that connection between motivation for a person in an organization and motivation for a person on stage as an actor. I think there's something to be investigated there. And thank you very much. I'm going to have to go soon, but
Thank you so much. Thank you. And do stay in touch if you want. If you're interested in continuing to investigate those, let me know. I mean, any ways if you work in organizations, and I'm always interested in ways to keep figuring out how to apply and further develop this. So,
how do we contact you, Tom? Are you on LinkedIn or a direct?
I am on LinkedIn. Yeah.
I'd like to say something. I was thinking about what was said about people and organizations, that you have to do something to make them want to do the right thing. But what I experience is that people in organizations, and I'm not speaking about the bad jobs that people only do for the money, but people come to work to make a contribution. You don't have to do anything to make them want to do anything. The problem is, I think, what Tom said, that people are striving for very different things. So I'm in a job right now. I'm talking to two departments who work closely together. They don't work together. Let's say that's what's happening. Everybody we speak to is telling us how good they're doing, and they can't understand why the other people aren't doing what they should do. But from both sides. So everybody is trying to do the best thing for the company. That's not the problem. They can't understand that somebody else has quite a different perspective to what's needed. So what you were saying, just making people understand that very often you are not right in what you think. so that's a very important thing to learn, and people don't know that often.
It reminds me of that systemic phenomena where everyone's convinced that maximizing what they're already doing is what's best for the whole.
Yeah.
We could just do more of what we're already doing. Our little group can do more of what it's already doing. Everything would be fine, instead of realizing that the whole thing needs to be rewired. And I think of Claire's comment earlier about that question you would ask at the beginning of the meeting, right? I think just that sense of shared vision. I used to think mission statements were just hokey. I used to think, oh, it's just a let's get together a mission statement. I am absolutely now a disciple of mission statements, because without them, you end up in those places that Ed's talking about, I think.
Yes. Eve.
Yeah. Well, Tom, I was wondering if you had any time, or you'd consider doing an online workshop for people interested in the connection between this work and systems thinking. I went to a virtual clowning workshop that's run by some people in India in September, and it was fantastic. And so it seems like a lot of people have been doing things online, and it does enable people to do things across national boundaries. I mean, to me, the only challenge would be coming up with, because I think it would be better to have a topical focus, something working on jointly, like climate change or COVID reaction or something.
Yeah. I'm more and more interested in it all the time, and this session has greatly elevated my interest in trying to do something on a more regular basis of bringing people together. Because I'm
going to use this as an opportunity to say, draw this session to a close. Sorry to be oppressing everybody who wants to stay on.
All right,
we need to draw it to an end, and I want to once again thank Tom. I think there's really obviously a great deal of conversation that could happen here. We could probably spend hours. We could explore it from different points of view. We could dive into a variety of different concepts and ask, how does variety apply? How does situation apply? How does context apply? How does this apply? Feedback apply? And we could go around this, do the exercise a few more times and go through a whole lot of tools. I could certainly see, a 5-hour workshop on this, exploring it, cybernetics, and the practicalities of making a difference in the world being a fantastic thing. Yeah. So maybe we'll do that. We'll see.
Yes, let's talk
but
about
for now,
that.
I'm very grateful to Tom and very grateful to all of you for coming. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm grateful to you for hosting. So thank you so much.
And have a wonderful Christmas.
Yeah, everyone have a lovely holiday, and I look forward to seeing you at a future event. And ASC Cybernetic or UK
yes.
Cybernetics.
We are planning to have conversation with Paul Pangaro and yourself next shortly. So we'd like to have a one-to-one conversation with you guys and do some planning on conferencing and combination and collaboration over the course of 2021. That would be really fantastic.